The war was already over. Everyone in the Concordant Dominion agreed on that, from the throne tiers of the capital moons down to the meanest supply clerk counting ration wafers on a frontier station. It had been over by the official reckoning, for 9 standard cycles. The human sphere had been broken open like a rotten seed pod, its inner worlds occupied, its outer colonies scattered, its fleets ground into slag and debris that still drifted in slow rings around a dozen dead suns. Earth itself sat under a blockade so total that not a single vessel had crossed it in 4 cycles. Humanity, the reports said, was finished, kneeling, a defeated species living out its last generations on rationed air. High Legate Warship believed this the way he believed in the pull of gravity or the burn of vacuum. It was not opinion. It was fact, sanded smooth by 9 cycles of repetition, and he had built the last third of his career on it. He stood now on the observation gallery of the dreadnought Unbroken Ascendant, 6 talons of one hand folded behind the plated ridge of his back, watching the human homeworld turn beneath him. It was a beautiful thing, he would admit that much. Blue and white and swirled with weather, ringed by the wreckage of its own dead defenders. A trophy world, a monument to the completeness of the Dominion's victory. "Legate," said the voice of his aide, Sublegate Kateri, from the archway behind him. "The Ascendancy Council's envoy has arrived. He is asking why the ceremony has not yet begun." "Tell the envoy," Voron said without turning, "that the ceremony begins when I say it begins. We are dismantling a species today. It deserves a certain gravity." He heard Kateri's talons click against the deck in the small, nervous rhythm she made when she disapproved but would not say so. She was young for her post, barely past her second molt, and she still carried the habit of thinking the council mattered more than the work. Voron had been like that once. Time and vacuum had cured him of it. The work today was called, in the flattened language of Dominion administration, the final disposition of the Sol Protectorate. What it meant, stripped of ceremony, was this: the formal reduction of Earth from an occupied world to resource holding. The last human governing body would be dissolved. The population would be catalogued, split, and relocated to labor sectors across 4 systems. The name Earth would be retired from the star charts and replaced with a survey designation. In 100 cycles, no one would remember there had been a species here at all, only that there had been a mine, and then not even that. It was, Voron thought, the most humane thing the Dominion could do. Humans bred fast and fought hard and refused, always, to understand when they had lost. Better to end the thing cleanly. Better to let the war truly be over. "Begin the descent of the tribute barge," he said, "and open a channel to the surface. Let them hear us coming." The Unbroken Ascendant was not alone. It hung at the center of a formation 40 warships strong, the 9th Enforcement Wedge, the same fleet that had cracked the human inner line at the Battle of the Kettle 9 cycles before. Around it drifted the observers, a scholar vessel from the archive, 2 frigates carrying council envoys, a hospital ship no one had needed in cycles that came along out of habit, and the black needle hull of an Inquisitor of the Silent Order, present because the Silent Order was always present when a species died, to make certain it stayed dead. 46 ships, enough to reduce a continent to glass in an afternoon. Overwhelming, redundant force, brought to bear on a beaten world, because the Dominion did nothing by halves, and because Warship did not believe in surprises. He had, in his long career, been surprised exactly twice, and both times humans had done it to him. The first was at the Kettle, where a human commander had rammed a fuel tender into the Ascendant's flank and cost him a third of his gunnery decks. The second was 3 cycles later, on a moon whose name he had forgotten, where a human garrison that should have surrendered had instead walked into their own reactor rather than be taken. He had learned from both. He had learned that humans were most dangerous precisely when they had nothing left, and so he had made certain, over 9 patient cycles, that they had less than nothing. No fleet, no industry, no allies, no hope. He had strangled the hope out of them one blockade cycle at a time, and now he stood over the corpse of their defiance and prepared to sign the papers. "Channel open," Kateri reported. "The human authority is responding. It is." She paused, and he heard something shift in her voice. "Legate, they are not requesting terms. They are asking us to stand down." Voron's crest flattened in the expression his species used for dry amusement. "Of course they are. Put it through." The gallery's air filled with a human voice. It was translated, of course, run through the Dominion's language engines and rendered in the clipped administrative dialect, but the machines could not scrub the tone out of it, and the tone was wrong. Voron had heard a great many human voices in 9 cycles of war and occupation. He had heard them furious, terrified, pleading, broken. This one was none of those things. It was calm, not the flat calm of the defeated who had stopped feeling. A different calm. The calm of someone reading the end of a story they already knew. "Concordant vessels," the voice said, "you are ordered to reverse thrust and hold position beyond the 3rd orbital marker. This is your only warning. You are inside the perimeter of a restricted volume. Withdraw." Kateri looked at him. The envoy from the council who had come onto the gallery unbidden made a wet sound of contempt in his throat. "A restricted volume," the envoy said. "They have no ships, no guns, no perimeter. This is theater, Legate." "Punish it." Voron did not answer at once. He was old enough and had been surprised by humans enough times to feel the small cold thread that ran up under his plating when a defeated enemy did something a defeated enemy should not do. But he looked at the world below, at its rings of dead ships, at the total blockade his own fleet enforced, and he weighed the thread against 9 cycles of fact, and the fact won. "Ignore the warning," he said. "Continue the descent. Send the tribute barge. If they wish to spend their last hour pretending, let them. Kateri, log the transmission as a final act of defiance for the archive. It will make a poignant footnote." The barge went down. The channel stayed open, and the calm human voice repeated its warning twice more, at measured intervals, each time with the same unhurried certainty, and each time Voron ignored it, and the 3rd time the voice stopped. There was a silence then, on the gallery and on the open channel both, that Voron would remember for the rest of his life, though he did not yet know it was worth remembering. Then the human voice returned, and it said one last thing before the channel closed. "You were warned." 490,000 kilometers away, in the deep cold shadow of the moon, where no Dominion sensor had ever been permitted to look, because the Dominion had long since decided there was nothing there worth looking at. A young woman named Lieutenant Commander Ada Okonkwo-Reyes floated in the dark and listened to the same channel close. She was 29 years old. She had been 11 when the inner line broke at the kettle, 13 when her mother's ship was lost with all hands over a colony whose name was now a Dominion survey number, 20 when she had been pulled out of a shattered evacuation pod, half dead from cold and put, because there was nothing else left to do with the surviving young of a dying navy, into a program that did not officially exist. She had spent 9 cycles of her life on the far side of the moon, in a facility carved into a crater no telescope pointed at, working on a thing that had no name because names could be intercepted. The people who built it called it, among themselves, only the work. Ada was not the oldest person in the control cavern. She was, in fact, one of the youngest, and she felt the weight of that every time she took the command chair. Around her worked engineers 3 times her age, physicists who had been famous once, on worlds that no longer existed, weapons designers who had watched their entire life's discipline become a museum piece the day the Dominion arrived. They had all deferred to her, not because she was the smartest of them, though she was quick, because she was the one who had been out there. She had flown against the Dominion in the last free squadron, had seen the enemy up close, had come back and told them, in a briefing room that smelled of recycled air and old fear, exactly what they were up against and exactly why nothing they had would ever be enough. And then she had been the one who said the thing out loud that the old designers had only whispered. If nothing we have will ever be enough, she had said, then we stop building things like the ones we have. We build the thing they cannot imagine because they have already decided we are finished, and a species that is finished does not build. That was the crack in the wall. That was the whole of the strategy, if it deserved so grand a word. The Dominion had won so completely that its victory had become a blindfold. It had strangled human industry, human fleets, human hope, and in doing so it had convinced itself, top to bottom, that there was nothing behind the blindfold to fear. So the work had been built inside that blind spot, slowly, over 9 cycles, from the wreckage of 100 dead colonies and the minds of a generation that had nothing left to lose. It had been built with lunar regolith and salvaged reactor cores and components smuggled through the blockade one at a time inside crates of ration wafers. It had been built by the old and commanded by the young because the young were the only ones who still believed, all the way down, that finished was not the same as dead. "Commander," said the voice of her sensor chief, a gaunt man named Petrov who had been a colonial mining engineer before the war took everything else he was. "The tribute barge has entered atmosphere. They ignored all 3 warnings. The legate closed the channel." "I heard," Ada said. "Then it's real," Petrov said. He did not sound afraid. He sounded like a man watching a thing he had waited 9 years for and could not quite believe was arriving. "They're going through with the disposition. They're going to dissolve the government, catalog the population, retire the name. It's all in the intercepts. This is the day." Ada floated in the command chair and looked at the great dark shape that filled the cavern beyond the control gallery's window. She could not see all of it. No one could from inside. It was too large, and the cavern was too deep, and the only light was the red battle illumination that the old engineers insisted on, because it was easier on eyes that had to watch instruments for 18-hour shifts. But she could see enough. She could see the near flank of it, a curve of dark alloy that did not shine, that seemed instead to drink the red light and give nothing back, sweeping up and away into the dark like the side of a mountain that had been machined by something that hated straight lines. She had lived beside it for 9 years, and it still, every time she truly looked at it, made the small hairs on her arms stand up. "This is the day," she agreed quietly. "Signal the crew, all stations, we wake her up." She had waited so long for this moment that she had expected to feel something enormous when it came. Triumph, maybe, or terror. Instead, she felt very calm and very young and very aware of every person who had died to bring her here, whose names she had memorized because someone had to remember them, because a species that forgets its dead has already agreed to be finished. She had memorized 4,000 names. She would say them all if she lived when this was over. She had promised herself that. "Commander, raise to all stations," she said, and her voice went out through the whole hollow mountain, into the ears of the old and the desperate and the ones who had built the impossible thing in the dark. 9 years ago they told us we were finished. Today we are going to correct the record, bring her to life. And in the deep cold shadow of the moon, something vast began, very slowly, to open its eyes. The thing they had built in the dark had a name after all. It was not written down anywhere, not in the schematics or the logs or the encrypted intercepts the Dominion never quite managed to break. It lived only in the mouths of the people who had made it, and they said it the way other people said a prayer or a curse. They called her Threnody. A threnody, one of the old physicists had explained to Ada in her first cycle at the facility, was a song of mourning, a lament sung over the dead. The old woman had chosen the name, and when Ada had asked her why, the physicist had smiled with half her mouth, the half that still worked after the burns, and said, "Because if we ever have to use her, it will mean we have already lost everything, and she will be the last song we sing over the graves." Ada had been 20 then and had thought it morbid. She was 29 now and understood it as the plainest kind of hope. You did not build a lament unless some part of you intended to be alive to sing it. Threnody was not a fleet. That was the first thing the Dominion would fail to understand, and the failure would cost them everything. Every strategic assumption the Concordant Dominion held about warfare rested on the mathematics of the fleet, the swarm, the wedge. Many hulls, many guns, distributed risk, redundant force. You did not put your strength in one hull, because one hull could be killed, and then your strength was dead. The Dominion had won the war by outmassing humanity across 1,000 engagements, by always bringing 40 ships to a fight where humans could field 10. Their entire doctrine, their entire imagination, was shaped like a fleet. So the humans had not built a fleet. They had built a single ship, one hull, and they had poured into it everything that 9 cycles of a dying civilization could scrape together, every reactor core, every gram of exotic alloy smuggled past the blockade, every last idea from a generation of designers who no longer had to worry about cost or schedule or survival because they had already accepted they were dead. Freed from the tyranny of the fleet, they had asked a different question. Not how do we build many ships that can each hurt the enemy a little, but how do we build one ship that the enemy cannot hurt at all, and that can hurt the enemy in a way the enemy has no concept of? The answer had taken 9 years and 4,000 lives, most of them lost smuggling the pieces through the blockade, and it filled a crater on the far side of the moon. Reactor cascade at 40%, Petrov called from the sensor station. Holding stable, no thermal bloom detectable from Earth or the fleet. The shroud is working. The shroud, another thing the Dominion could not have imagined because it violated their sense of what a warship was for. Threnody was built, first and above all else, to be unseen. Her hull did not reflect. Her reactors did not bloom heat into space where sensors could find them. They rooted their waste into vast thermal sinks buried in the lunar rock, so that a ship the size of a Dominion dreadnought could bring her power plants to full cascade and register, to any watching eye, as nothing but a slightly warm patch of moon. She had been designed by people who had spent 9 years learning, at the cost of their lives, exactly what the Dominion sensors could and could not see, and she had been shaped, every plate and angle of her, to live inside the blindness. Ada watched the cascade climb and thought about the shape of that blindness, because the shape of it was the whole plan. The Dominion could not see Threnody because the Dominion was certain there was nothing to see. Their sensors were good, but sensors only find what the mind behind them believes is possible, and the Dominion mind had decided, 9 cycles ago, that humanity was finished, and a finished species does not build a mountain in the dark. Cascade at 50, Petrov said. Commander, we have a complication. Say it. The tribute barge. Petrov's hands moved over his console. It's landed. The disposition ceremony is proceeding on the surface at the old capital, but the intercepts just changed. The legate isn't waiting for the ceremony to finish before he begins the population catalog. He's ordered the enforcement wedge to begin orbital tagging now. They're deploying census satellites, thousands of them. They're going to start splitting the population within the hour. The number moved through the control cavern like a cold draft. Splitting the population meant the relocations would begin, and the relocations were the thing the work had truly been built to prevent, because once the population was split across 4 systems, it could never be made whole again. And a species scattered was a species that had, in every way that mattered, ended. Threnody had been built to buy back that hour. To reach across 500,000 kilometers of dark and put the fear of extinction into an enemy who had forgotten the word, and to do it before the census satellites finished their work. How long, Ada said, until they've deployed enough satellites to begin relocations? At current rate, Petrov's jaw worked. 90 minutes, maybe less. And our cascade. Full power in 70, if nothing breaks. 70 minutes to full power. 90 minutes until the enemy began to end her species. 20 minutes of margin, and 9 years of everything riding on it, and a ship that had never once flown, whose every system had been tested in isolation and never together. because you could not test fire a weapon like Threnody without revealing that she existed. They would light her up for the first time in the middle of the only battle that mattered. If a coolant line that had sat cold for 4 years cracked under thermal load, if a reactor core smuggled through the blockade in 3 pieces had a flaw in its weld, if any one of 10,000 things that had never been tried under fire chose this hour to fail, then the last song of a dying species would end on a cough and a spark in the dark, and no one would ever know they had come so close. Ada had thought about this for 9 years. She had thought about it enough that the fear had worn smooth, the way the fact of victory had worn smooth in the legate's mind, and she found now that on the far side of all that thinking there was only the work. "Bring the cascade up as fast as she'll take it," she said. "Petrov, I want every eye we have on that fleet. I want to know the instant they see us, because the moment they see us is the moment the plan changes. Nakamura," she turned to the young helm officer, a woman even younger than herself, 24, who had been a child refugee and had grown up inside the facility and had never once in her life stood under an open sky. "Begin pre-flight on the drive. Slow, gentle, nothing that blooms." "Aye, Commander," Nakamura said, and her hands, which had trembled during every drill for 9 years, were perfectly steady now. Ada keyed the general channel again. She did not make speeches by nature. She had learned, too, the way she had learned everything else about command, because the job required it, and there was no one older left willing to do the job. But she found she had one more thing to say to the hollow mountain full of the old and the desperate before the hour began. "To everyone who built her," she said, "you were told this could not be done. You were told our physics was a museum, our fleets were scrap, our species was over. You built her anyway in the dark, where they were too proud to look. Whatever happens in the next 90 minutes, remember that you did the impossible thing first, and only then found out whether it would be enough. Bring the reactors to full. We are going to introduce the Concordant Dominion to the ship. They said we could not build." On the unbroken ascendant, High Legate Voron watched the census satellites unfold like a swarm of silver seeds against the blue of the human world, and felt, for the first time in 9 cycles, the return of that small cold thread beneath his plating. He could not say why. The ceremony below was proceeding flawlessly. The last human government had been dissolved without incident. Its representatives had signed the instrument of disposition with the calm resignation of a beaten people, and if their calm had a strange quality to it, a stillness that reminded him unpleasantly of the calm in that final transmission, well, that was to be expected of a species watching itself be catalogued. The satellites deployed on schedule. The enforcement wedge held perfect formation. 46 ships, 46 of the finest hulls the Dominion had ever built, arranged in a wedge of overwhelming and redundant force around a world that could not fight back. "And yet," "Sublegate," he said, "the final transmission from the surface, you warned to log it as an act of defiance. I want you to have the archive analysts examine it instead. The voice, the tone." Katiri's crest tilted. "The tone, Legate." It was not the voice of the defeated. He turned from the viewport, and his old eyes, which had seen 2 surprises in a long life and remembered both, moved slowly across the tactical display, across the perfect formation, across the blue world and its rings of dead ships. It was the voice of someone who had already seen how this ends. I have heard that voice twice before. Both times it belonged to a human, and both times it cost me 1/3 of a ship or a garrison of my men. Humans are most dangerous when they have nothing left, and we have spent 9 cycles making certain they have nothing left. The council envoy, still lurking at the edge of the gallery, made his wet contemptuous sound again. "Legate, with respect, you are seeing ghosts. There is nothing out there. Our sensors sweep every cubic kilometer of this system on a rotating cycle. If the humans had so much as a gunboat hidden behind a moon, we would know." "Would we?" Voron said. It was not quite a question. "Katiri, order a full active sweep, not the rotating cycle." Everything we have at once at maximum gain. The whole volume. Legate, that will blind our passive sensors for. Do it. She did it. And for 90 seconds the unbroken ascendant screamed light and radiation into the dark in every direction at once. The most powerful active sweep a Dominion dreadnought could produce. A wave of scrutiny that washed across the human world and its rings of wreckage and out, past the third orbital marker, and across the pale, scarred face of the moon, and into the deep cold shadow on the far side of it, where it broke against a mountain of dark alloy that gave nothing back, and returned to the ascendant, carrying no news at all. Sweep complete, Kateri reported. Nothing, Legate. The system is empty of hostile mass, to a confidence of 99.9. There is nothing out there. Varun Shesk looked at the empty tactical display for a long moment. The cold thread under his plating did not go away. But he was an old man who had built the last third of his career on a single certainty, and the sweep had confirmed the certainty, and against the evidence of his finest sensors, he had only the memory of a calm human voice. "Very well," he said at last. "Resume the disposition. Begin the population split on my authority." He gave the order that would scatter a species across 4 systems and end it forever. And 490,000 kilometers away, in the shadow the sweep had washed over and found empty. The reactor cascade of the warship Threnody climbed through 60% toward full power, and the young woman in the command chair watched the Dominion's most powerful sensor look straight at her ship and see nothing at all, and understood, with a cold, clean certainty of her own, that the plan was going to work. The cavern that held Threnodi's control gallery had once been a mining survey station, in the years before the war, when humanity still thought of the moon as a place to dig, and not a place to hide. The old bones of that station were still in the walls, rock bolt anchors, sealed core sample shafts, a faded pre-war placard by the lift that read Lunar FARSIDE Geological Survey, Post 14, and under it in smaller letters someone had never gotten around to removing, "The sky begins here." Ada had walked past that placard 10,000 times in 9 years. She read it every time. It had become, without her ever deciding it should, the closest thing the work had to a motto. The sky begins here. On the side of the moon no one looked at, in a mining post the war had forgotten, a dying species had started building itself a sky. She thought about the placard now, while the reactors climbed toward full cascade, and the census satellites unfolded above the blue world, and the clock counted down toward the end of everything, because thinking about the placard was easier than thinking about the children. She had made herself read the captured disposition doctrine 3 years ago precisely so that she would not be surprised today, so that when the moment came, she would be operating on cold arithmetic and not on the heat behind her eyes. But the doctrine had been a document, and the children were real, and no amount of preparation had prepared her for Petrov's flat voice saying youngest first. "Commander," it was Nakamura at the helm, quiet enough that only Ada could hear. "Can I ask you something?" "Before it starts." "Ask." "Do you think she'll hold, really, not the briefing answer, the real one?" The young helm officer kept her eyes on her console, her steady hands resting on controls she had drilled on 10,000 times and never once used in flight. "I was 6 when I came here. I've never flown anything. I've never even seen the sky except on a screen. And in an hour I'm supposed to fly the biggest ship anyone ever built, into the sight of the whole enemy fleet, on her first flight, at full power, and I keep thinking, what if the reason no one ever built a ship like this before is that it can't actually be done, and we just haven't found out yet?" Ada was quiet for a moment. It was a fair question, and Nakamura had earned a true answer, and the true answer was that Ada did not know, that no one knew, that the entire enterprise rested on a stack of untested assumptions, any one of which could kill them. But she had learned in the last free squadron from a captain who was now a name on her wall, that a commander's job in the final hour is not to share her fear. It is to give her crew something truer than fear to stand on. "I'll tell you what I know," Ada said. I know that every person who built her knew exactly what you just said and built her anyway. I know the old physicist who named her did the math on every weld and every line and never once told me it was safe, because it isn't, and she built her anyway. I know we tested every system we could test without being seen, and the ones we couldn't test we built 3 times over and prayed. That's not certainty, Nakamura. That's not a briefing answer that says everything will be fine. What I know is that we did the most careful, impossible thing that has ever been done, and now we find out if careful was enough. And I know that I would rather find out sitting next to you than next to anyone else alive. She put a hand briefly on the younger woman's shoulder. She'll hold because we built her to hold, and if she doesn't, then we'll have died doing the one thing they swore we couldn't. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of finished. Nakamura let out a breath. Her hands did not tremble. The sky begins here, she said, so quietly it was almost to herself. The sky begins here, Ada agreed. Behind them, at the sensor station, Petrov made a sound. Not a word. A sharp intake, the sound a person makes when a number on a screen means something they did not want it to mean. Commander, he said, new contact in the Dominion formation, the black one, the needle hull holding off the dreadnought's flank. It just changed posture. He worked his console. It's an Inquisitor of the Silent Order. We flagged it on arrival, but it was passive, just an observer. It's not passive anymore. It's doing something to its sensors. He frowned deeply, the way he did when the physics in front of him did not match the physics in his head. Commander, it's not sweeping like the dreadnought did. It's not looking harder, it's looking differently. It's running some kind of quantum gradient scan across the far moon volume. Very narrow, very slow. It's not looking for a ship. It's looking for an absence. It's looking for a place where the background radiation is too quiet. The cold, clean part of Ada's mind, the part that had kept her alive, went very still. That was the one thing the shroud could not fully hide. Threnody did not reflect, did not bloom heat, gave nothing back to an active sweep. But she was there, a mass the size of a small moon, and a mass that large bent the faint background hum of the universe around itself, cast a shadow not of light but of quietness, a hole in the noise. The engineers had known this. It was written in the design notes in the old physicist's cramped hand. She cannot be found by what she reflects. SHE can only be found by what she silences. And they had judged over 9 years that no Dominion sensor was subtle enough to hunt for silence, because the Dominion hunted for targets, for reflections, for heat, for the loud presence of an enemy. It had never occurred to Dominion doctrine to hunt for a hole in the quiet, because the Dominion had never faced an enemy patient enough to build one. But the Silent Order was not the rest of the Dominion. The Silent Order existed to make certain that dead species stayed dead, and a discipline built around that grim task learns, over its own long history, to look for the things that should not be there, to look for absences, for the too quiet room, for the shadow and the noise. How long, Ada said, until that scan resolves us? Petrov ran the numbers twice. She watched him do it, watched him not want to say it, watched him say it anyway because that was the job. It's slow, he said. The gradient scan across a volume that size takes time, but it's methodical and it's coming toward our arc. At current rate 40 minutes, maybe 45. It'll find the hole in the quiet before our reactors reach full cascade. 40 minutes to be found. 58 minutes to full power. The margins, which had never been enough, had just inverted. The enemy would find them before they were ready. Ada looked at the reactor readout climbing with agonizing patience toward full cascade, and at the black needle hull on the tactical display sweeping its slow, subtle, terrible scan across the dark. And she understood that the plan she had carried for 9 years had just broken, and that she had, as she had always known she might, exactly as long as it took to think of a new one. Options, she said aloud to the whole gallery, because she had learned that too from the captain on her wall. When your own plan breaks, you do not hide it, you open it to the smartest people in the room and you let them save you. The silent order will find us in 40 minutes. We reach full power in 58. If they find us before full cascade, we reveal ourselves weak, half-charged, unable to hold the volley or run the salvage field. That's the one outcome we cannot survive. Talk to me. Fast. The gallery erupted, quietly, the way a room of very old and very expert people erupts, which is to say in a rush of overlapping precision. And Ada listened, and the clock ran, and 40 minutes began to bleed away toward the moment the Empire's grimmest hunters would find the hole in the quiet where a dying species had built its sky. The answer came, in the end, from an engineer named Demb, who was the oldest person in the facility, and had said perhaps 40 words in all the years Ada had known him. He had been a thermal systems designer before the war, on a colony now called a survey number, and he had spent 9 years building the vast heat sinks that let Threnody run at full cascade and register as cold rock. He raised one thin hand, and the gallery quieted, because when Demb raised his hand, it meant he had already solved the thing the rest of them were still shouting about. "The scan looks for silence," he said. His voice was a dry whisper, and everyone leaned in to catch it. "So we stop being silent, not loud, not a bloom they can target. But if I bleed a fraction of the heat sinks, then a controlled thermal signature into the volume around us, shaped to look like natural far-side outgassing, the kind of thing that survey post used to log before the war, then the background noise around us goes up. The hole in the quiet fills in. Their gradient scan looks for a place too quiet to be natural, and finds a place exactly as noisy as an old geological vent should be. It hides us not by making us darker, by making the dark around us ordinary." Petrov was already running it. "It works," he breathed. "The math works. If we bleed the sinks in a shaped pattern, it masks the mass shadow. But Commander, if we bleed the sinks, we lose thermal margin on the reactors. We can still reach full cascade, but we lose the safety buffer. If a coolant line cracks under load with the sinks already bled, we can't dump the heat fast enough. The reactors could run away. So we hide from the silent order," Ada said slowly, "by removing the one thing that keeps our own reactors from cooking us if a weld fails." "Yes," Demb whispered. "And a weld might fail, because we've never run her at full cascade before, and half her lines have sat cold for 4 years." "Yes." Ada looked at the old man and at the black needle hull on the display and at the reactor readout, and she thought about the placard by the lift. "The sky begins here." She thought about 4,000 names, and about 1,000 children being sorted youngest first into manifests above the blue world, and about a captain on her wall who had taught her that command is the art of choosing which risk to run when every choice is a risk, and choosing it fully, without flinching, because a commander who flinches at the moment of choice loses the crew before she loses the ship. "Do it," she said. "Bleed the sinks in the shaped pattern, fill in the hole in the quiet. Demb, you own the reactor margin now. You watch every line. If one so much as sighs, you tell me, and we make the next hard choice when it comes. But we are not going to be found half-charged. We come to full power in the dark, ordinary and unseen, and we choose the moment we are seen." She turned to the gallery. "Everyone heard the engineer. He just bought us the 18 minutes we needed. Remember his name. Say it tonight if we have a tonight. Demb. Now back to work." The heat sinks bled their shaped and careful warmth into the far-side dark, and on the tactical display, the hole in the quiet where Threnody hung began, slowly, to fill in with a signature that looked exactly like an old geological vent. The pre-war survey had logged 100 times, and the black needle hull of the silent order swept its subtle scan across the volume, and found nothing but the ordinary breathing of a dead world, and moved on. On the unbroken ascendant, the inquisitor of the silent order reported the far-side volume clean, with a note appended in the flat grammar of that order. Anomalous thermal venting consistent with dormant geological activity, catalogued, non hostile. High Legate Voron Shesk read the note twice. He was not a member of the Silent Order and did not pretend to understand its methods, but he had worked alongside them long enough to know that they did not look for ships the way his gunners did. They looked for wrongness, for the shape of a thing that should not be. And their report said the far side was clean, and yet the cold thread under his plating had not gone away since the human voice had said you were warned, and Voron had learned at great cost to trust the thread over the report. "Inquisitor," he said, opening a private channel to the Black Needle hull. "Your scan found geological venting on the lunar far side, in the volume behind the third orbital marker." "Correct, Legate." The voice of the Silent Order was always the same, quiet, precise, without weather, catalogued as non-hostile. "When did that volume last vent geologically? Check your archive. That survey post was abandoned before the war. In 9 cycles of our occupation, how many times has the far side vented heat into that arc?" A pause. In the pause, Voron watched the census satellites unfold above the blue world, and felt the thread pull tight. "Legate," the Inquisitor said at last, and for the first time in Voron's long acquaintance with the Silent Order, there was something in the flat voice that was almost, not quite, a hesitation. "The archive has no prior record of thermal venting in that arc. The signature is consistent with dormant geological activity, but the arc has been dormant. There is no record of it venting before. I logged it as non-hostile because the signature is textbook. But you are correct that its timing is," the pause again, "anomalous. Do you wish me to rescan?" Voron stood on the gallery of his dreadnought and held in his old hands the single loose thread that could unravel everything, and he knew it, and he weighed it. A textbook signature, a dormant arc that had never venting now, on the one day his entire fleet had gathered to bury a species. It was exactly the kind of too-perfect ordinariness that his instinct screamed at. And yet the Inquisitor's scan was the finest instrument the Dominion possessed for finding wrongness, and it had returned clean, and he had a disposition to complete, and a council envoy at his elbow already convinced he was seeing ghosts, and the whole weight of 9 cycles of certainty pressing down on the side of the scale that said, "It is nothing, old man, it is rock, finish the work." "Rescan," Voron said. And that was the moment the whole thing turned, though Voron would not know it for another quarter hour. Because as the Inquisitor began to rescan the farside arc, the human commander, watching that same Black Needle hull change posture on her own instruments, made the decision not to wait to be found. The margins had inverted once already in Ada's favor when Dem bled the sinks. Now they inverted again. Threnody was 11 minutes from full cascade. The rescan would resolve the anomaly in 9. For the second time that day, the plan that had held for 9 years broke, and this time it broke in the direction of no more waiting. "Petrov," Ada said, watching the needle hull begin its second, hungrier sweep. "The Silent Order is coming back for a closer look. Dem's mask will hold against a first scan. It won't hold against a second one that's already suspicious. Time to full cascade. 11 minutes. Time until that rescan resolves us. 9. Then we don't wait the 11, she stood. She had meant to reveal Threnody in a slow, chosen, theatrical rise, at full power on her own terms. And now she would reveal her 2 minutes early and slightly undercharged, because the alternative was to be found first, and a weapon found is only a target, but a weapon that reveals itself is a god. The difference between the two was 2 minutes and an act of will, and Ada Okonkwo-Reyes had spent 9 years becoming the kind of officer who could tell the difference in the moment it mattered. Nakamura. "Pre-flight complete." "Complete, Commander, she's ready." "Petrov, open every Dominion frequency." "Dem," she looked at the old engineer, who looked back at her with eyes that had seen a colony die and a ship born. "We're going early. 96% cascade instead of 100. Can she hold a full volley and run the salvage field at 96? The old man did the math in the silence of his head, and the whole gallery waited on it, and he whispered, "Barely, If nothing cracks. If nothing cracks, Ada repeated and almost smiled. That's been the whole plan for 9 years, hasn't it? If nothing cracks. She settled back into the command chair. This is going to happen sooner than we planned, she told her crew, off the open channel, in the quiet before the loudest moment in the history of her species. That's what the last 9 years were really for. Not to build a perfect plan, but to build people who could throw the plan away at the right instant and still win. Bring the cascade up as fast as you'll take it. Say the names to yourselves. Then let's give the Empire back its war. The black needle hull swept its subtle scan across the volume where the sky began, and the clock ran down, and the reactor cascade of the warship Threnody climbed toward full power with the hunters of the Silent Order closing in and 11 minutes on the wire. And Ada Okonkwo-Reyes watched both numbers race toward the same instant, and made herself ready to speak to the Concordant Dominion the moment the cascade would let her. Cascade at 90, Petrov called. The Silent Order's rescan is still short of our arc. Dem's mask is holding, but it won't hold once it resolves us, Commander. We're on the wire. A low sound moved through the control cavern, not quite a cheer, more the tautness of 100 people who had held their breath for 9 years and knew the moment had finally arrived early. Ada let it pass and did not join it. She had watched the black needle hull sweep its subtle scan on her own instruments, and where the others felt the countdown, she felt only the cold, clean stillness she had learned in the last free squadron. The legate had ordered both sweeps. The old alien on the dreadnought was afraid. Not of anything he could see, of the memory of a voice. That meant he was the dangerous kind of enemy, the kind who trusted instinct over instruments, and it meant that when Threnody finally showed herself, the legate would react faster than his own doctrine allowed. She would have to account for that. Petrov, the population split. Where does it stand? They've begun. His voice was flat. First relocation manifests are being generated, sector assignments. They're sorting them by, he stopped. By age, Commander, youngest first. They're taking the children first. The cavern went very quiet. Ada had known, intellectually, what the split would look like. She had read the captured Dominion doctrine on species disposition. It was a dry document, written by administrators, and it explained in the same tone one might use for sorting ore that the young of a relocated population were moved first because they adapted fastest to labor sectors and formed no attachments to a homeworld they would not remember. She had read it 3 years ago. Reading it and hearing Petrov say the children first, while a swarm of silver satellites did exactly that above the blue world were two different things, and the second one put a heat behind her eyes that she had to breathe through before she could speak. Time to full power, she said. 58 minutes. Time until the first relocation ships depart with a manifest aboard. Petrov checked. 70. The transports have to reach orbit and load. They can't move anyone off-world for at least 70 minutes. 12 minutes of margin, then. 12 minutes between Threnody reaching full power and the first ship full of human children leaving the system forever. It was not enough margin. It had never been enough margin. But it was the margin they had, and Ada made herself look at the great dark curve of the ship beyond the gallery window and remember what she had built, because the whole point of Threnody was that she did not need much margin. She needed only to exist, and to be seen existing at the right moment by the right enemy. Then we go early, she said. We reveal at 96% before the Silent Order resolves us, and we show them what we made from a position of our choosing instead of theirs. She turned to the helm. Nakamura, on my mark and not before, you will take us out of the shadow, slow. I want the Dominion to watch us rise. I want them to have time to understand what they are looking at before we do anything at all. The weapon is not the guns, do you understand me? Everyone in this cavern understand me. The weapon is the moment they realize we were never finished. The guns are only the punctuation. Understood, Commander, Nakamura said. Ada settled back into the command chair. There was nothing to do now but ride the last minutes of the cascade and watch the silent orders scan crawl toward their arc. And so she did the thing she had promised herself she would do, quietly, under her breath, while the mountain came to life around her. She began to say the names. She started, as she always did, with her mother. Commander Ada Okonkwo, lost with the destroyer Anansi, and 206 others over a colony now called Survey Designation 771. Then the 206. She knew them because someone at the facility had recovered the Anansi's crew manifest from a salvaged data core, and Ada had memorized it the way some people memorized scripture. Then the crew of the Anansi's sister ship. Then the names from the other manifests, the other dead ships, the smugglers lost running the blockade, the engineers who had died of radiation building Threnodi's reactors, the physicists who had worked themselves into the grave finishing a weapon they knew they would not live to fire. 4,000 names. She did not get through all of them. There was not time. But she got through the first 800 while the cascade climbed, and each name was a small stone she set down. And by the time Petrov called out that the reactors had crossed 90%, she had built a wall of the dead in her mind, and she stood behind it, and she was not afraid anymore. 94%, Petrov said. 95. Coolant temperatures climbing with the sinks bled but holding, no cracks. She's holding, Commander. God, she's holding. 96. 96%, Nakamura breathed. Commander, Threnody is as ready as she'll be before the scan finds us. All systems green. She's alive. For a moment no one in the control cavern spoke. 9 years. 4,000 names. A mountain built in the dark by people who had been told they were finished. And now it was awake, and it was theirs, and it was the most powerful single object humanity had ever created, floating in the shadow of the moon with its reactors singing at cascade and its dark hull drinking the red light, waiting for a young woman's word to be born into the sight of its enemies. Ada stood up from the command chair. She wanted to be standing for this. She had earned that much. Petrov, she said. Open a channel, every Dominion frequency all at once, maximum power. I want the legate to hear me before he sees me. Nakamura, on my last word, take us up, out of the shadow into the sun, into their sight. Rise slow. She waited until Petrov gave her the nod, until the channel was open and her voice was pouring across every frequency the Concordant Dominion used, into the ears of 46 warships and one old legate who had built his career on a certainty. Concordant Dominion, Ada said. This is the human vessel Threnody. 9 of your cycles ago you declared my species finished. You broke our fleets and blockaded our world and told yourselves the war was over. You told yourselves so completely that you stopped looking. This is the last warning you will receive, and unlike the last one, this one comes with a face. Release the manifests. Return the children to the surface. Withdraw beyond the 3rd orbital marker. You have 3 minutes. I will be visible in 10 seconds, and I want you to spend the time between watching me and understanding what it means that you never saw me coming. She lowered the channel. She looked at Nakamura. She looked past Nakamura at the great dark curve of the thing they had made. Take us up, she said. Let them see her. On the unbroken ascendant, the human voice came out of every speaker at once, on every frequency, so loud and so total that, for a moment, High Legate Voron Shesk thought a system had failed. Then he understood that it had not, that this was deliberate, that the humans were flooding his entire fleet's communications with a single voice, and the cold thread under his plating became something colder and larger, and he was already turning toward the tactical display before the voice finished speaking. Find it, he said. Whatever is transmitting that, find it now. Legate, Kateri said, and her voice had gone strange. There is nothing to find. The sweep was clean. The volume is empty. It must be a recording, a relay. It named itself, Voron said. It said withdraw. A recording does not negotiate. Find it. And then the far side of the moon began, very slowly, to change. Voron saw it on the tactical display first as an impossibility. A mass, an enormous mass, appearing where there had been nothing, not flickering into existence as a cloaked ship would when it dropped its cloak, but rising out from behind the pale, scarred limb of the moon into the raw light of the human sun. The tactical system did not know what to do with it. It flagged the contact, dropped the flag, flagged it again, tried to classify it as a moon and failed because moons did not move, tried to classify it as a fleet and failed because a fleet was many contacts, and this was one, tried to classify it as a station and failed because stations did not have the long predatory geometry that was now unfolding into the sunlight, angle by angle, plate by plate, a shape that drank the light and gave nothing back, a shape the size of a small moon, a single hull. One ship rising. The gallery was silent. The council envoy had stopped making his wet, contemptuous sound. Kateri stood frozen at her station. And High Legate Voron Shesk, who had been surprised by humans exactly twice in a long life, felt the whole certainty of 9 cycles crack down the middle like a dropped stone, and looked at the thing rising out of the moon's shadow, and understood with a horror that had no bottom, that he was not looking at a ship at all. He was looking at everything the Dominion had assumed was impossible, made real, and pointed at him. "Mass estimate," he heard himself say. "Give me a mass estimate on that contact." Kateri's talons moved, stopped, moved again. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Legate," she said, "the contact masses more than our entire enforcement wedge, all 46 ships combined, and it is," she swallowed, "it is O1 hull." The words moved across the gallery of the unbroken ascendant and struck each of the Dominion officers in a different place. But they struck all of them, because every one of them had been trained in the same doctrine, and the doctrine had no room in it for what was rising out of the moon. Voron Shesk forced his mind to work. This was the discipline of a long life, the ability to keep thinking when the certainty had cracked, and it was the only thing that separated him now from the frozen officers around him. Analyze, he told himself. It is a ship. Ships can be understood. Ships can be killed. He made himself look at the thing rising in the sunlight not with the horror of a believer whose faith has broken, but with the cold eye of a soldier assessing a target. And the cold eye told him the horror was correct. The human vessel was still rising, unhurried, exactly as its commander had promised, giving him time to look, and the more he looked the worse it became. He understood at once why the sweep had found nothing. The hull did not reflect. His active pulse had struck it and died. It was not cloaked in any way his sensors could detect and defeat. It was simply built, from the ground up, to be unseen, and that meant the humans had spent years learning precisely what his sensors could do in order to build a thing they could not do anything about. He understood, from the way the vessel showed no thermal bloom despite a mass that implied reactors beyond anything the Dominion fielded, that its power plants vented their heat somewhere he could not see, which meant it could run at full battle power and look, to a passive scan, like cold rock. He understood from the sheer scale of it that the humans had made a choice his own civilization was constitutionally incapable of making. They had put everything into one hull. And that, the cold soldier's eye told him, was the most terrifying thing of all, because the Dominion's entire strategic superiority rested on the arithmetic of the fleet, distributed force, redundancy, no single point of failure. The humans had thrown all of that away and built the opposite, a single point that was not a failure but a fortress, a ship that concentrated the industrial output of a dying civilization into one impossible hull, and in doing so, they had built something the Dominion had no doctrine to fight, because Dominion doctrine assumed the enemy also believed in fleets. You could not swarm a thing that outmassed your entire swarm. You could not outredundant a thing built to be unkilled. The humans had not outbuilt the Dominion. They had changed the game in the dark, in the blind spot the Dominion's own pride had created, and they had waited 9 cycles for the one day the Dominion's whole fleet would be gathered in one place to watch a species die, so that they could reveal the truth to all of it at once. Legate, the council envoy's voice had lost its contempt entirely. It was thin now and high. Legate, what is that? That, Voron said quietly, is the ship we told ourselves they could not build, because we told ourselves they were finished. And a finished species does not build. He straightened. The horror was still there, would always be there now, but under it the old discipline was reasserting itself, and with it came the first cold flicker of a plan. Kateri, the vessel gave us 3 minutes. How long remains? 2 minutes 40 seconds, Legate. And the population split, the relocation transports. Loading, Legate. First manifest aboard in, her crest flattened. The children are already aboard the lead transport. It is preparing to break orbit. Voron closed his eyes for a single heartbeat. He was old, and he had done many hard things in a long career, and he had told himself for 9 cycles that the disposition of the human species was the humane end to a war that could not otherwise end. He had believed it. He still, in some sanded smooth chamber of his mind, believed it. But the thing rising out of the moon had put a question to him that his belief could not answer, and the question was this: if the humans were truly finished, why had they built a god in the dark? And the only answer was that they had never been finished at all, and everything he had told himself for 9 cycles was a story the winners tell to sleep at night. He did not have time for that thought. He put it away, into the place where he kept the 2 other times humans had surprised him, and he became again the High Legate of the 9th Enforcement Wedge, and he made the decision that would decide everything. All ships, he said, and his voice went out across the wedge comm, because a fleet takes its temperature from its commander and a frightened fleet dies faster. Battle stations, target the human vessel, full spread all batteries on my mark. We will not wait out its ultimatum. We will strike first, together, all 46 hulls, and we will learn whether it can be hurt before it learns whether we can be frightened. Legate, Kateri said, the transports, the children. If we open fire, the human vessel will. The human vessel will do what it came to do regardless of the transports, Voron said. It did not come to bargain, it came to be seen. The bargaining is theater, the being seen is the weapon. Our only chance is to strike before the theater ends and find a flaw in it. Recall the lead transport, hold the split. Give the humans no target among our own that they can use and put every gun we have on that hull. He watched the dark shape finish its rise, watched it hang now fully in the sunlight, vast and silent and patient, and he felt the 2 minutes bleeding away. Mark. The 9th Enforcement Wedge opened fire. 46 warships, the finest hulls the Concordant Dominion had ever built, ships that had cracked the human inner line and ground a species into slag over 9 cycles, fired as one. It was the single most concentrated volley in the history of Dominion arms. Thousands of energy lances and mass drivers and seeker munitions converging on one target from 46 vectors at once, a wall of destruction that had, in every prior engagement of the war, meant the instant death of whatever it touched. It crossed the 490,000 kilometers in the time it takes a heart to beat twice, and it struck the warship Threnody. And Threnody did not die. In the control cavern beneath the moon, the impact registered as a long, deep, rolling shudder, felt in the deck and the teeth and the bones, and then as a cascade of readouts across every station, and Ada Okonkwo-Reyes gripped the arms of the command chair and read them as fast as they came and understood, in the space of 3 seconds, that the ship was going to hold. Full-spread impact, Petrov called, and there was something wild in his voice now, something that had been buried under 9 years of grief and was clawing its way up. All 46 ships, everything they have, direct hit across the whole dorsal surface. Damage, he laughed once, a cracked sound. Damage is superficial, Commander. Ablative layer took it. Reactors nominal. Structural integrity 98%. She held, Commander, she. I see it, Ada said. Her own voice was steady. Inside she was screaming, but the outside was steady because the crew took its temperature from her, and a frightened crew died faster, and she had learned that in the last free squadron from a captain who was now a name on her wall. Nakamura, keep us rising. Do not return fire. Not yet. Petrov, the transports. What are the transports doing? The lead transport it broke orbit, Commander. It's running. Full burnout system. The children are aboard, and the legate, Petrov's hands flew. The legate is recalling the others. He's holding the rest of the split, but the lead ship is already gone. It'll be past the outer marker in 4 minutes. Ada looked at the tactical display. She saw the whole shape of the moment laid out on it, cold and clear, the way the last 2 minutes of a battle always went cold and clear for her, and she understood what the legate had done. He had not fired to destroy her. He had known or guessed that he could not. He had fired to test her, to find a flaw, and finding none, he had done the only thing left to a beaten commander who is too proud to be beaten. He had taken a hostage. He had sent one transport full of children running for the outer marker, and he was betting that the human ship that outmassed his entire fleet would not dare to act while 1,000 human children hung in the dark between Threnody and her guns. He had made one mistake. He had assumed the weapon was the guns. It was the same mistake his whole civilization had made about her, the same mistake it had made about humanity itself. To look at a thing built to survive and see only a thing built to kill, to look at a species that would not die and call it a species that could not lose. The Dominion had spent 9 cycles studying human weapons, and had never once thought to fear a human machine whose only purpose was to save. And now that machine hung above the blue world with the power of a fleet in its single hull, and the legate had aimed all his fear at its guns, and left the door to his hostage standing open. Petrov, Ada said, can we reach that transport before it hits the outer marker? Reach it how? If we fire on it. Not fire on it, reach it. Threnady's tractor envelope. The salvage field. Can we get a lock on that transport and hold it before it jumps? The cavern went silent as the meaning landed. Threnody had not been built only to be unseen and unkilled. She had been built by people who understood that a weapon which could only destroy was a weapon the Dominion already understood, and so they had given her, folded into her vast hull alongside the reactors and the guns, a thing that no warship in the Dominion possessed, a tractor field of monstrous strength, meant originally to haul the wreckage of dead colonies out of decaying orbits so their people could be buried. A salvage field, a field built to save things. And it was, Ada had realized in the last cold, clear minute, the actual ultimate weapon, because it did the one thigh the reactors pushed past their rated cascade with a sound Ada felt rather than heard, a deep pressure in the chest, the whole mountain seeming to lean into the effort. Warning lights bloomed amber across a dozen stations. Somewhere aft, an old coolant line that had sat cold for 4 years shrieked against the new load, and a repair crew that had built the thing with their own hands threw themselves at it, and it held. Salvage field charging, Petrov called. Range to the transport is beyond anything we ever tested. Commander, if the lock slips at that distance, the field backlash could tear a hole in our own reactor housing. We could lose her. Charge it, Ada said. Nakamura, do not move us. The legate is watching for us to twitch toward his fleet. He is not watching for this because his people don't build things like this, because a species that thinks in fleets and disposal has never once built a machine whose only purpose is to save what would otherwise be lost. Let him watch our guns. We reach past him with something he can't imagine. On the tactical display, the lead transport was a small fleeing mote, running full burn for the outer marker where it would fold space and vanish into the dark with 1,000 human children aboard. And behind it the 9th enforcement wedge hung in its broken confidence, 46 of the finest hulls in the Dominion, guns still trained on a ship they had learned they could not kill. Ada watched the numbers converge, the transport's distance to the marker, the salvage field's charge, the 2 racing lines closing on the same terrible point. Field at 90%, Petrov said. Transport 90 seconds from the marker. Come on, Ada breathed. Come on. 95. Transport 60 seconds. Commander, the lock is fluttering, the distance is. Hold it, hold it. Say the names, Petrov, if it helps. Ada Okonkwo, 206 aboard the Anansi. Say them and hold the lock. Field at 100%. Petrov's voice cracked and steadied. Lock is solid. Commander, I have a solid lock on the transport. Salvage field is ready. Your order. The transport was 30 seconds from the marker. Beyond it, the Legate's fleet. Below it, the blue world. Aboard it, 1,000 children who would not remember their homeworld, sorted youngest first by an administrator's clean arithmetic, one manifest ahead of the end of a species. Ada Okonkwo-Reyes, 29 years old, who had memorized 4,000 names because someone had to remember them, stood in the command chair of the impossible ship and gave the order the whole 9 years had been for. Take them back, she said. Bring the children home. The salvage field of the warship Threnody reached across 490,000 kilometers of dark, past the guns of the entire Concordant fleet, and closed, gently, around the fleeing transport. There was no violence in it. That was the thing the Dominion would never forget, the thing the archive analysts would puzzle over for 100 cycles. The human weapon did not fire. It reached. The transport, 30 seconds from vanishing forever, simply stopped. Its engines strained and achieved nothing. It hung in the grip of a force it could not see and could not fight. And then, slowly, so slowly, it began to move backward, back toward the blue world, back toward the surface, drawn home in the fist of a machine that had been built to save the drowned and the dead. And every ship in the Concordant Dominion watched it happen and understood, all at once, exactly what they were facing. On the unbroken ascendant, High Legate Warship watched his hostage taken from his hand without a shot fired, and knew that the war he had won 9 cycles ago had just ended in a way he had never imagined a war could end. He understood it completely, and the completeness was the horror. The human ship had not destroyed his fleet. It could have. It outmassed all of them together. The full volley of 46 ships had scratched its paint. It could have burned the 9th enforcement wedge out of the sky in an afternoon, could have reduced his dreadnought to the same slag his own guns had made of the human fleets 9 cycles ago. It had chosen not to. It had instead reached past every gun he had, and lifted 1,000 children out of his grasp as gently as a parent lifting a sleeping child from a floor. And in doing so, it had told him a truth that no volley could have told him. The truth was this: they did not need to destroy him. They had built a thing that made his entire strategy meaningless. Every card the Dominion held, the blockade, the disposition, the split, the hostage, rested on the assumption that the humans could be threatened, could be made to lose more than they could bear. And the humans had built a machine that simply took the threatened thing away, quietly, absolutely, from beyond the reach of anything he could do about it. He could not blockade a world defended by that. He could not disposition a species that could reach out and undo his dispositions with a machine his own fleet could not scratch. He could not even fight it, because it had proven it would not fight back with violence, and there is no answer in Dominion doctrine to an enemy who has decided your violence does not matter. Legate, Kateri whispered, the transport is being returned to the surface. The children, the split. Legate, what do we do? Warship looked at the vast dark shape hanging in the sunlight, the ship the humans had built in the blind spot of his pride, and he thought about the calm voice from the surface that he had ordered logged as a poignant footnote. And he thought about the 2 other times humans had surprised him, and he understood that he had spent 9 cycles being surprised by the same thing over and over, and had never once learned the lesson. Which was that a species does not become finished simply because you have decided it is. You had told a lie to yourself for 9 cycles, old man, and the lie was comfortable, and the humans built the truth in the dark while you slept inside the lie. The human channel opened again, on every frequency, and the calm young voice filled the gallery. "Concordant Dominion, this is Threnody. Your hostage is home. Your ultimatum answer has arrived, and it is this: we are not finished. We were never finished. You mistook a species that would not surrender for a species that could not fight, and while you congratulated yourselves on a war you thought was over, we built the thing you could not imagine because you had stopped imagining we existed. You are going to withdraw beyond the third orbital marker. You are going to release every manifest. You are going to lift the blockade. And you are going to carry a message back to your Ascendancy Council, and the message is a single sentence, and I want your legate to deliver it in his own voice so that he understands it. The message is: humanity is not a resource holding. Humanity is a question you did not know how to ask, and now you will spend the rest of your history learning the answer." Voron Shesk stood on the gallery of his dreadnought. At the center of 46 of the finest warships the Concordant Dominion had ever built, before the trophy world he had come to bury, and he gave the only order a wise commander could give when he has finally, after a long life and 3 surprises, learned the lesson. "All ships," he said, and his old voice was steady because a fleet takes its temperature from its commander, and this fleet needed above all else to hear its commander sound like a survivor. "Cease fire. Recall all census satellites. Release all manifests. Withdraw beyond the third orbital marker and hold. The disposition of the Sol Protectorate is—" He stopped. He had built the last third of his career on a single certainty, and the certainty was rising in the sunlight before him, and it did not shine, and it gave nothing back. The disposition is cancelled. The war is over. He paused, and then, because the young human commander had asked him to say it in his own voice, and because he had learned at last that there was a kind of victory in surviving a lesson, he opened the channel himself. "Threnody," he said, "this is High Legate Voron Shesk of the 9th Enforcement Wedge. I have carried many messages to my council across a long life. I will carry yours. Humanity is not a resource holding." He looked at the ship one last time, the mountain the finished species had built in the dark. "Humanity is a question we did not know how to ask. We will spend the rest of our history learning the answer." Sheskout. The 9th Enforcement Wedge turned as one and withdrew beyond the third orbital marker, and the blockade of Earth, unbroken for 4 cycles, broke at last, not with a shot, but with the quiet retreat of 46 ships from a world they had finally learned to fear. In the control cavern beneath the moon, Ada Okonkwo-Reyes watched the Dominion fleet withdraw, and the transport settled gently toward the blue world with its 1,000 children safe aboard. And only then did the outside of her, the steady part, finally come apart quietly in the red light, where the crew could pretend not to see. 9 years, 4,000 names. A mountain built in the dark by the old and the desperate, and commanded by the young because the young were the only ones who still believed that finished was not the same as dead. She thought of the physicist with the half-burned smile who had named the ship a lament, who had said they would only ever use her if they had already lost everything, and Ada understood now that the old woman had been wrong about one thing. Threnody was not a song for the dead. She reached past the guns of an empire and brought 1,000 children home without firing a shot. She was not a lament. She was the first note of something else. Across the gallery, the old ones who had built her were doing the things people do, when a thing they never expected to survive is suddenly survived. Dem sat down slowly at his station, the reactor margin he had guarded with his life finally, blessedly, unneeded, and put his thin face in his hands and did not move for a long time. Nakamura, who had never in her life stood under an open sky, stared at the tactical display where the enemy fleet was withdrawing and said very quietly to no one, "I want to see it. The sky. The real one. I want to go outside." And Ada, hearing her, made a silent promise that the young helm officer who had flown the impossible ship on her first flight, and never once let her hands shake, would stand under the open sky of Earth before the day was out, and see with her own eyes the thing she had saved. Petrov came and stood beside the command chair, and he was weeping unashamed the way the old ones wept now that it was safe too. The manifests are released, he said. All of them. The satellites are recalled. Commander, they're withdrawing. All of them. It's real. We did it. You did it. We did it, Ada said. All 4,000 of us. She wiped her face and stood one last time in the chair and looked out the gallery window at the vast dark shape of the thing her dying species had built in the place the enemy was too proud to look. Open a channel to the surface. To everyone. Every human, everywhere, on every world they still hold, and this one they just lost. She waited for the nod. Then, for the first time in 9 years, she spoke to her whole species at once, and her voice was young, and it did not shake. This is Threnody, she said. The blockade is broken. The children are coming home. They told us we were finished. Today we corrected the record. Now come outside and look up and remember every name we lost getting here, because we are going to spend the rest of our history proving them wrong. And later, when the Dominion fleet was gone past the outer marker, and the transport had settled safe on the surface, and the 1,000 children had been carried down into the arms of a world that had thought it would never see them again, Ada kept her promise. She took Nakamura down to the surface herself. In the first ship humanity flew freely in 9 cycles, and she walked the young helm officer out of the shelter and into the open, and she watched the woman who had never seen a real sky tilt her face up to the blue and the weather and the pale, distant curve of the moon where the sky had begun, and weep, and laugh, and reach up with both hands as though she could gather the whole of it to herself. And Ada thought of the old physicist with the half-burned smile, and of the placard by the lift, and of 4,000 names, and she understood that the lament had become an anthem, and that the last song of a dying species had turned out in the end to be its first. And on a blue world under an open sky, for the first time in 9 long cycles, the people of Earth walked out of their shelters and looked up, and saw the dark shape hanging in the sunlight where their enemy's fleet had been, and understood all at once that the Empire had been wrong, and that they had never, for one single moment, been finished at all.